Speed up, yes. Well, I think we need to wait. Yeah, it's not bad. The speaker here is going to be captured on there. It's quite wide angle, isn't it?
You're live now.
I'm live.
Yes.
That's right. You've got these 2 weeks left in the chapter. 2 weeks before the term starts. Has she arrived?
Morning, everybody. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you all to the opening of this conference, which I hope will be of more significance than academic conferences normally are. My name is Mary Fulbrook. I'm involved in the Centre for Collective Violence, Holocaust and Genocide Studies in UCL's Institute of Advanced Studies, which is a fantastic context for holding a conference such as this in conjunction with the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction at UCL. What we're dealing with in this particular humanitarian crisis is, as all of you know very, very well, something which has been considered as genocide in the making. As myself, a historian of Germany, and particularly dealing with the Holocaust, I keep thinking of historical parallels, and in particular what comes to my mind is this something like 1938? As a historian, I can get very, very steamed up about where was the world in 1938? Why were they not accepting refugees from Nazi Germany? Why were they not protesting in 1935 at the loss of full citizenship of German Jews? Why were other countries not taking in refugees in sufficient numbers to allow them to escape the catastrophe that was about to sweep over them in Europe? So I do kind of wonder whether it isn't our duty and responsibility, even scholars such as myself who know extremely little about other areas of the world and their past, because my specialism is not in that area, is it not our responsibility to try and inform ourselves better and to assist and enable informed and productive debate? And I think this is precisely what UCL is very good at. What we need for a humanitarian crisis of this order is a multidisciplinary approach, an approach that brings together social scientists, psychologists, physical scientists, people who can understand the multiple different aspects of this major crisis, which is afflicting so many hundreds of thousands of people in this area today. So I'm very pleased to welcome here for the next 2 days a range of quite extraordinary scholars, policymakers, representatives, activists, people who are concerned not merely to understand the crisis, but also to intervene in an informed and intelligent way in what is facing so many people right now. So UCL is a place where we are not merely concerned to understand the past and understand ways of representing the past and the present, but also to ensure that our understanding and our privileged position in being able to explore these aspects is put to good use in informed debate about shaping the present and shaping the future. So welcome to what I hope will be 2 very, useful, productive and interesting days. Let me hand over now to my colleagues.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to UCL. Could I just have a show of hands of how many people are from UCL and how many people from UCL? Okay, wonderful. And so we've got many, many guests from outside of UCL. So welcome to London on this sunny, bright day. And unfortunately, you'll only be able to get a glimpse into something that little area up above. So please do keep looking at there, especially if you've been travelling and need to keep yourself away. So I'm Professor Monica Lappenpool. I'm actually a paediatrician by trade. But here today I'm representing the Vice Provost role that I have for South Asia in the Global Exchange Office. Here at UCL we have a global exchange strategy and we develop partnerships with many different areas across the world. And South Asia is one of the regions I particularly am leading the partnerships in. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Pro Vice Provost Office and ourselves here. I've been looking through the programme and it's extremely challenging. There's going to be many, many discussions and I'm sure we'll raise a lot of debate here. And as Mary has said, that's what we pride ourselves in at UCL, in having those debates. So as a paediatrician, I've also been looking through the programme. Tomorrow you also have some interesting areas which are important to early child health. And we know that for the future of children, giving children the best start in life, considering those interactions between environment children live in is an extremely important part of making them resilient and having the best future. So I was very pleased to see these challenges on the programme as well. We're also particularly honoured today that our High Commissioner from Bangladesh will be actually arriving fairly soon. She's a little bit delayed, but she will be with us soon. And so I would like to thank her as well for joining us and sharing her views with us, and you'll hear from her later today. So a little bit about UCL for those who don't know about UCL. As Mary said, we're multidisciplinary. We pride ourselves in being one of the oldest universities to take female academics into the institution, and was founded in 1826. We work across sectors, work across faculties, and the idea of that is to have academic excellence and bring all the people such as yourselves here today to debate issues, and we don't shy away from issues, as you can see. We also are very proud that in the QS rankings and the global rankings, we moved up from 10th position to 8th position this year. And that's something I know we don't like talking about rankings, but we're actually very proud of. And so today is a showcase really of how those partnerships develop and enable us to do the best academic work we can. Partnerships are very, very important. And I think over the next 2 days, I'm sure everybody will be talking in very respectful ways to hear each other's viewpoints. And partnerships are actually developed through equivalence, listening, communication, dialogue. And also on the programme, it was great to see that you'll be having an exhibition, a photographic exhibition. So I would suggest that everybody goes and spend some time looking at the photographs, because as we know, pictures actually speak 1,000 words. And you'll hear lots of words in the next 2 days. If you go away with some of the images and the pictures that you'll see, I'm sure that will stay very close to your heart. And in years to come, we'll sort of probably bring back some of the discussions that we have today. What we want to do is have global impact, and I think a conference like this is all about global impact and how you can get your voices out there and translate some of the dialogue that you're having here today out into the external world. And that's one thing that I try and do. So one of our roles in our offices, if you ever come to visit again, is to consider partnerships, linking you up with other academics, finding other people who have common or different perspectives that you can debate. And so I don't want to take any more time up because you've got a lot to listen to today. I'm sure you'll enjoy the next 2 days, but I want to thank you all for travelling so far from different parts of the world to join us and taking the time out to have these difficult issues challenged in debates over the next 2 days. And thank you for our organisers as well of spending so much time to put this programme today during a difficult, challenging time in the global arena, as we know from many countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Peter Salmons. I'm Director of the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction at UCL, and I'll now, on behalf of the Institute, like to welcome you all here today. There are 69 million people worldwide who have been forcibly displaced from their homes. Now, as an underlying principle of the UN Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030, is that no one should be left behind. It's essential that the needs and aspirations of the forcibly displaced are addressed. Of these, about 10 million are stateless, with limited or no legal rights, and often denied refugee legal status. The challenges they face are severe. And about 1/3 of the stateless forcibly displaced belong to the Rohingya diaspora. The Rohingya are a Muslim majority ethnic group from today's Rakhine state in Myanmar. And after a long period of systematic exclusion, the Rohingya were stripped of their citizenship in 1982. And then since the late 1970s, nearly 2 million people have fled Myanmar, with another 1 million people living as internally displaced people within Rakhine state. Displaced in waves of violence, forced displacement perpetrated by the Myanmar authorities. Violence towards the Rohingya in Myanmar from 2017 caused a mass displacement of people to southeast Bangladesh. And the Human Rights Council, acting under UN Resolution 3422, has cited this as a crime against humanity and called for an investigation for genocide against the authorities in Myanmar. The majority of the nearly 1 million displaced people are residing in overcrowded temporary makeshift shelters, bamboo frames, and plastic sheeting in Cox's Bazar district. Kutupalong is the world's largest refugee camp. These camps are highly susceptible to rainfall-triggered landslides, flash floodings, and cyclones, and the likelihood of public health emergencies from infectious diseases, leaving a vulnerable population threatened by a new disaster. Most Rohingya are not recognised as refugees, legal refugees by the Bangladesh government, which severely restricts permanent and safe construction of housing, opportunities for proper livelihood, and access to education. So today is an international conference on the Rohingya crisis, but placed in a comparative perspective. I think this comparative perspective, for the first time, looked at the forced exodus of the Rohingya in the global and historical context of other genocides, such as Rwanda and the Holocaust. The conference will be opened by Her Excellency Ms. Saida Muna Tasneem, the Bangladesh High Commissioner to the UK. We have a special guest, Mr. Christopher Doherty, who's a member of the UN Human Rights Council fact-finding mission on Myanmar. And we have other experts such as Professor Mary Holbrook, who can place the Rohingya genocide in comparative perspectives, and other people such as co-conveners, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Dhaka University, who is an internationally renowned scholar and commentator. And then there are people such as Dr. Taiful Rahman, a medical doctor who runs an independent NGO with centres and clinics in the Rohingya camps for the most vulnerable. So we hope this conference aims to look at the root causes of the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, the drivers of the Rohingya influx into Bangladesh, the Rohingya diaspora, and their adaptation strategies in host countries, environmental hazards and degradation, implications for peace and security in the region. Over 300 scholars, students, practitioners, or policymakers have registered over the 2 days, with over 40 presenters and over 200 published abstracts, making this, we believe, one of the most significant Rohingya conferences today. So we welcome you all. And with that, I shall hand over to Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, who is the principal convener of this conference.
Thank you, everyone. I am the organizer of this conference, Faris Ahmed, and I work as a lecturer at the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction. So my duty was to make sure, everything is organized properly. People are traveling from US to Australia, in between many countries, from developing countries, and we had speakers, more than 40 speakers. I was writing invitation letters, booking flights and hotels. So to make sure everything is organized and speakers are here, but my morning started with bad news today. One student from Bangladesh, she was supposed to fly in the evening and arrive early in the morning tomorrow and present at 3 p.m. tomorrow. And she was literally crying and saying, my visa has been rejected. And 41 students submitted the abstract, and after peer review, we selected 2 students and we are funding them fully with flights, accommodation, and she was the top of all the submissions. We provided invitation letters and everything was organized, but you understand, still, I hope she is not a terrorist, but still her visa was rejected. So one thing I want to highlight, the freedom of movement. So I would say here we all are very powerful people because you made it. You are now in central London at UCL. Probably you have a strong passport, or I don't know, many of you got the visa as well. But there are unfortunate people who are suffering. And this is a student from Dhaka University in Bangladesh. And I was thinking about the Rohingya, the stateless people. They don't even have a passport, no identity. So 4 million of them spread from the US to Australia, and mostly they are living illegally in South Asia. Now we understand what is the meaning and the strength of freedom of movement. And I visited the Rohingya camps, I think many of you, and I found them, it's been 2 years almost. They live on rice, lentils, and oil. That is what they get weekly. I cannot think about it. Like if you give me rice, lentils, and oil, and to live for 2 years, or even more, I don't know, more years to come, how you survive in that context. So I would request you all to use your power. You are not you, I think we are one of the fortunate group of people, and we can really help this marginalized group of people, not only Rohingya are just 4 million. There are another 6 million stateless people, another 60 million displaced people who were forced to displace because of war, I don't know, disasters, conflict, all these things. 70 million means it's kind of half of the population of Bangladesh and the same population of the UK. They are spread all across the world, but if you combine them, they represent a whole big country. It's not the suffering of them right now, the Rohingya and previously other communities suffered, as Professor Mary mentioned. And more communities are suffering, and I would request you to use your power, use your strength of freedom of movement, freedom of your passport. You people are powerful and you meet more powerful people. I think you go to UN Security Council meetings all around the world. And I would request you to challenge those people who are against migrants and refugees. And how can we resolve this problem? And I would request you to utilize this platform for 2 days here at UCL, to use your power use your power of movement, use your power of voice, and let's try to help those 70 million and more to come in the coming years, and be united and work together. So the floor is open, and make it your day. Thank you, everyone. One last thing, thank you. So our washroom and toilets are in the lower ground floor. So this is the second floor, so lower ground and ground, first and second, because I always confuse with ground and lower ground. And please follow the fire exit. There is no fire drill today. If the fire alarm, please follow it. And in the ground floor, just 2 floors down from here, we are organizing the photo exhibition. Photographer Mahmoud is there. He captured photos back in 17 and 18 and latest this month. So you will see in 2 years of transformation what happened. So that is really appealing. And in the next door is G17, please remember, G17 is the photographic exhibition. And the next door is G11, G11, where we have coffee, morning coffee, we have lunch, we have evening coffee, and we have drinks receptions for different events. Okay, and yes, I think we are expecting more people. You can see a little bit in the center. Okay, thank you, and I want to echo again, please use our power, our expertise. If you are a journalist, you can write a news article. If you are a blogger, you can write an online blog, you can tweet. If you are an academician, you can write an article. If you are a lawyer, you can write a piece of report. If you are a stakeholder, a politician, go and talk in front of the UN Security Council meetings. So I think we all, like I am a lecturer and I thought I can organize a conference and I can bring everyone and speak in the same loud voice together for the migrants, refugees, or anyone suffering. So use your power, whatever you do, even a tweet can help us. And thank you and enjoy the next 2 days.
Thank you. We will move on to the first session. Could I just ask, please, we're expecting people to be arriving all the time, so if you could just, if you're particularly at the end of a row, could you move in towards the centre so people arriving late can join? I know some people wandering up and down trying to find a seat, so do please move in towards the centre. Thank you. Okay, so in this first session we'll have two speakers. We'll have Her Excellency Saida Muda Tasneem, the Chief Guest and High Commissioner Bangladesh to the UK. But first I'd like to introduce Mr. Christopher Sidoti as our special guest, as a member of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar. So, Chris, thanks.
I'll just move that up there. Maybe I'll stand up so that I can see you better. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. This conference is a great opportunity to be able to speak about the work of the fact-finding mission on Myanmar. But what that really means is to speak about the people who have been affected by the actions of the Myanmar government, particularly the Myanmar military. And I'm in a very privileged position to be able to speak first because it gives me the opportunity of providing some of the context for what has happened, the context in which many of the other speakers over these 2 days will be talking in more specific detail about aspects of the Rohingya crisis. The United Nations Human Rights Council appointed our fact-finding mission 2 years ago, and we provided our detailed report, some 450 pages of it, in September last year. So almost a year has gone by since that report has been presented. I would like to speak a little about the background to the report, that is what we did, so that you have some understanding of the basis of our findings. Second, I'd like to discuss what we actually found in relation to the Rohingya. And third, and perhaps most importantly, since I'm a lawyer, I would like to talk about the legal implications of what we found and how accountability can be ensured. So that's a lot to cover in 25 minutes, but I'll do the best I can and particularly be interested in having discussions with you over the next 2 days. As I said, the fact-finding mission was appointed 2 years ago. We were appointed before the crisis of August 2017. In fact, we met in Geneva on the week commencing August 21, 2017, to commence our work. And we spent a whole week planning how we would tackle our assignment to look at human rights in Myanmar generally. At lunchtime on the Friday, the 25th of August, as we were about to finish our meeting, having successfully concluded our planning, everything was thrown into disarray when we started receiving the first reports of what was happening in northern Rakhine State. And of course, that overshadowed our work for the next year as we sought to respond to it. The fact-finding mission was not able to visit Myanmar itself. We were banned by the government of Myanmar, but we had no shortage of people to speak to. Not only Rohingya people, but people from all the other ethnic minorities that over the years had been forced out of Myanmar and lived in exile in surrounding countries. Our staff conducted around 875 interviews with victims and eyewitnesses. 550 of those Rohingya people in Cox's Bazar and in Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta. We also had over 250 interviews of secondary witnesses, academics, media, governmental representatives, UN and NGO representatives who had seen what was going on. We had access to an enormous quantity of satellite photographic and video imagery, which, when verified, provided validation of many of the eyewitness accounts we had received. So although not permitted to enter Myanmar, and although the Myanmar government didn't speak to us, we had no shortage of evidence on which to rely. Our mandate dealt with Myanmar as a whole, but we focused on two specific areas: Rakhine State and the Kachin conflict in Kachin and North Shan states. And obviously for this conference, the situation of the Rohingya is the relevant one, so that will be my focus. Our investigation took its starting point as 2011-12. We were to look at recent allegations of human rights violations and define recent as going back to that period. So far as the Rohingya is concerned, the date was selected because of the violence of 2012, occurring in June and October of that year. At the time, it was widely portrayed as intercommunal violence. We, however, considered that description inaccurate. Our finding was that this was not a spontaneous outburst of hostility, but rather the result of planning to instigate violence and amplify tensions. The planning was undertaken by a number of actors at that time. The amount of hate speech that led up to the June and October 2012 violence was quite extraordinary. Largely propagated by extremist Buddhist monk-led organisations, particularly Mabatha, also by Rakhine ethnic political parties, especially the Rakhine Nationalities Development Party, which on one occasion cited with approval the activities of Hitler and said that inhuman acts were sometimes necessary to maintain a race. We looked closely at the question of military involvement in the events of 2012 and found that the military were at least complicit. Our suspicion, unprovable to the standard that we adopted, the standard of reasonableness, but our suspicion was that the military, in collusion with many of the ethnic nationalist groups, were in fact the instigators of the violence. But certainly we had no difficulty in concluding that the portrayal of the violence of 2012 as intercommunal violence was inaccurate and grossly misrepresented the planning, strategizing and instigation of the violence that actually occurred in fact. The result of that violence was that 140,000 Rohingya people were displaced. Of those, 128,000 still live in IDP camps 7 years later. We look next at the violence that occurred in October 2016. The events then were more of a surprise, instigated by a small number of amateurish attacks by an organisation that called itself the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. Calling itself an army was a little bit of self-promotion, like many of these groups did. It was a fairly ragtag bunch with, in 2016, no significant weaponry at all and a very small number of people. They were successful in capturing some weapons, maybe 100, 110 weapons from the police posts that they attacked. Some people tragically were killed, a small number of people. But perhaps the most significant lesson arising from 2016's violence was what happened afterwards. It led immediately to a reinforcement of military and police presence in northern Rakhine State and action taken against the domestic Rohingya population. Police regularly went to Rohingya villages and took away any serious knives or farming implements that could be used as weapons. So machetes, for example, and sickles that were used in fields, these type of implements were removed, leaving people with no more than kitchen knives in their homes. Secondly, the military also required the removal of traditional fencing that Rohingya people use around their villages and between their family compounds. This permitted the police and the military to have open visibility into the villages and the compounds, and also easy access on a very rapid basis when entering villages and compounds. Then in early August 2017, two of the most notorious divisions of the Myanmar military, the 33rd and 99th Light Infantry Divisions, were moved from Kachin State into northern Rakhine State. At the same time, around about the 8th of August, helicopter gunships were brought into the area for the first time. The relevance of this is that it indicates that at the very least, the military knew what was going to happen and were well prepared for it, at the very least. The attacks by ARSA of 25 August 2017 came as no surprise to the Tatmadaw, the military of Myanmar. They were ready, they had their strategies and their plans. It was not an occasion that led to a provoked outburst of spontaneous action on the part of the military. All was carefully orchestrated. We approached our task with the attitude of of no assumptions. We, as a fact-finding mission, were of the view that we needed to find the facts, and that meant assuming nothing. We did not assume the existence of ARSA. We did not assume who, if they did exist, they might be. During the course of our investigations, we became satisfied that ARSA existed as an organisation led by some Rohingya people. We looked at the possibility of whether ARSA had been established by the military, and we could find no evidence of that. We considered whether some of the ARSA members were provocateurs planted by the military. We could find no evidence of that. But we are quite certain that the military had informants within ARSA and knew exactly, therefore, what was being planned and what was about to be executed. It was said that around 30 security posts were attacked on the night of August 25, including police posts and one military camp. We were satisfied that there were 16 to 17 attacks. We could not find satisfactory evidence of the remainder. But we were satisfied that there were 16 or 17 attacks. The nature of the attacks, though, needs to be taken into account. Clearly, across northern Rakhine State, the number of people involved in the attacks would have gone into the high hundreds or low thousands. The biggest estimate we've seen is 3,000 people, but I suspect that that is probably an exaggeration, maybe more like 1,500 in total across the up to 30 attacks. The vast majority of these people were farmers and fishermen. It was men who did it, so I'm using fishermen technically. They were untrained and they were largely unarmed. The only weapons, that is firearms, that appear to have been used in these attacks were those 100 to 110 weapons that had been captured from the police in the raids of October 2016. So this was largely an untrained, unarmed, undisciplined, uncommanded group of local people led by a handful of ARSA activists. Some of them said that they had been told by ARSA that when they launched the attack, there were all of these trained, well-armed ARSA divisions ready to come in behind them. Of course, that didn't exist and it didn't happen. What followed those largely unarmed, largely untrained people attacking up to 30 spots was an intensity of violence never before seen in Myanmar. Myanmar has a history, an unbroken history of violence for the last 70 years. But what happened over those following 3 or 4 months in northern Rakhine State was without precedent in Myanmar for its intensity, for its widespread nature, and for the level of brutality. We examined intensively attacks on 9 villages by the Tatmadaw. We verified attacks on another 54 sites. We had first-hand reports of attacks on 22 other villages. We came to the conclusion that the estimate of at least 10,000 people killed was a conservative estimate. We were able to record through satellite imagery the destruction of over 37,000 Rohingya homes and structures, the total destruction of 392 villages. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has established that over 750,000 people fled across the border into Bangladesh. This is the factual scale of what occurred during the months after 25 August 2017. Those events occurred as a result of deliberate strategy. It was not unplanned. It was not a response to surprise attacks. It was not the military just reacting. It was out of all proportion to the fairly minor attacks that had occurred on 25 August, and the consequences have been extraordinary. Having found the facts, we sought to apply international law to them. We looked at the three principal categories of international law: crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. So far as crimes against humanity were concerned, it was not difficult to come quickly to the conclusion that there had been widespread crimes against humanity committed by the Tatmadaw in northern Rakhine State. Those crimes included murder, imprisonment, enforced disappearance, torture, rape, sexual slavery and other forms of sexual violence, persecution and enslavement. We also found extermination and deportation. We considered that there had been systematic oppression and discrimination sufficient to found a finding of persecution of the Rohingya people, itself a separate category in crimes against humanity. And we also said that the events may amount to the crime of apartheid. We found, most importantly, that the acts were committed as part of a widespread and systematic attack on a civilian population, a key ingredient of crimes against humanity. The second category was war crimes. And this was a more difficult question. War crimes can only occur in a situation of armed conflict. The armed conflict can be international or non-international. Certainly, many of the specific acts that constituted crimes against humanity also constituted war crimes if they occurred within the context of armed conflict. So the elements of murder, torture, cruel treatment, outrages on personal dignity, attacking civilians, displacing civilians, pillaging, attacking protected objects, taking hostages, sentencing or execution without due process, rape, sexual slavery, sexual violence. All of these acts would constitute a war crime if committed in the context of an armed conflict. The difficulty was whether we could classify what had occurred in northern Rakhine State as an armed conflict. Did the fairly insignificant actions of ARSA-led farmers and fishermen reach the level of violence to constitute an armed conflict? In the end, on balance, we said yes, from 25 August, but not before that. You know, before that, historically, the Rohingya people have been amongst the most peaceful ethnic minorities in Myanmar. Now, they have not had, since the early 1960s, any notable armed insurgency movement. They have not been involved in the kind of violence that we see with the Kachin and the Shan and the Wa and others. We could not say that there was a situation of armed conflict before 25 August 2017. The International Committee of the Red Cross was satisfied that there was armed conflict after that, and in the end we were happy to rely on their expert assessment. They are the ones, the ICRC, responsible for the international law of war, and we relied on their assessment. But for us, it was a difficult task to establish that there was a non-international armed conflict involving the Rohingya in northern Rakhine State. On balance, we found that, and so we found that war crimes had been committed by the soldiers of the Tatmadaw. And third, genocide, the most difficult question of all. Genocide is defined by its convention as any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial or religious group as such. And then it lists 5 categories of act: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Having found facts, we had to examine each of those elements of the definition of genocide in turn. There was no difficulty in finding the Rohingya a protected group. It was a group defined by ethnicity and religion. It was hard to argue it's defined by race. I don't know what a race is, I have to say. But ethnicity, yes, religion, yes, defined in those ways. And so a group that could claim protection under the Genocide Convention. We had no difficulty in finding that 4 out of the 5 prohibited categories of act had occurred in northern Rakhine State. Of those 5 categories that I read out to you, the only one that we said was not occurring was the forcible transfer of children from the Rohingya people to another ethnic or religious group. But for the other 4 of the 5, no question. Nor was there any question about the intent to commit those particular acts. As I said, it was very clear to us that this was well planned, well orchestrated, strategized, commanded, controlled, right from the beginning. The biggest question was the specific purposive intent associated with the law of genocide. And that is that all of this must not just have been intended, but in addition, committed with the intention to destroy in whole or in part a protected group. This specific intent is very difficult to find. It's not usual that somebody who's going to order a genocide will write out an order saying, I order you to commit the crime of genocide, signed Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, Commander-in-Chief, Tatmadaw. You don't find that. You know, genocidal intent generally has to be found from surrounding circumstances. We said in our report that we had assessed the information, the facts that we had found, in light of the jurisprudence of international tribunals about the inference of this special intent. We found that the crimes in Rakhine State and the manner in which they were perpetrated were similar in nature, gravity and scope to those that have allowed international tribunals to find genocidal intent in other contexts. And particularly we're referring to the contexts of former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Jurisdiction of past tribunals has referred to 5 indicators by which this inference of genocidal intent can be drawn. They are 1, the broader oppressive context and hate rhetoric. 2, the specific utterances of commanders and direct perpetrators. 3, policies to exclude the protected group. 4, the level of organisation of the attacks, indicating a plan of destruction. And 5, the extreme scale and brutality of the violence committed. When we examined the facts that we had found in relation to the Rohingya people, we found those 5 indicators of the intent to commit genocide as having been present in Rakhine State. We did so relying on jurisprudence in actual cases of found genocides by international criminal tribunals. We could not, in relation to genocide, because of the difficulty of this special purpose, allocate responsibility to individuals on a definitive basis. But we did say that 6 named generals should be prosecuted for the crime of genocide so that a court properly constituted could determine their individual guilt. But we had no difficulty in describing the nature of what had occurred in Rakhine State against the Rohingya people. Such serious crimes require accountability. There are 2 dimensions of accountability for these crimes. The first dimension is perhaps the one that occurs to us most easily. Victims are entitled to justice for what they have suffered. And justice means that perpetrators must be held accountable. That is a fundamental principle of law. The second dimension, however, is critical for Myanmar, not just the first. And the second dimension is that accountability is not just about the past, but also about the future. The Tatmadaw and its commanders have been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity for 70 years. There is no reason to expect that they will change their ways unless and until someone is held accountable. Accountability is about the future. It's about protecting people and preventing recurrence of this endless cycle of violence and brutality that the Tatmadaw has shown itself committed to. We examined accountability at national and international levels. Ideally, national judicial systems will handle such important crimes, and many states now have criminal laws, domestic criminal laws dealing with these significant international crimes. In our view, it is impossible to consider the domestic courts of Myanmar as capable of handling these crimes. Just not possible. Myanmar has not even a memory of an independent judiciary. It has been generations since there have been judges and lawyers who know what judicial independence means. It is beyond the capacity of the Myanmar courts and Myanmar judges to deal independently with these kinds of serious offences against the top leadership of the military who continue to dominate the country. So we recommended strongly the need for international accountability through proper international tribunals. We can talk, if you wish, on another occasion, later today or whenever, about methods of accountability, the International Criminal Court, specialist tribunals, the International Court of Justice. But what I do want to emphasise is that accountability is absolutely essential, and accountability can only be found through international tribunals. My last point deals with the immediate priority. There's been mention already this morning about the Rohingya in the camps. This is Kutupalong. The situation in the camps is absolutely appalling. But because there is so much open access to the camps, most of what we see in the media and hear in public debates is about the terrible conditions under which 1.2 million people are living in the camps in southeastern Bangladesh. Far worse and rarely reported is the condition of the remaining Rohingya in northern Rakhine State. And that is the greater priority even than the 1.2 million in the camps. The conditions in which they live have not changed at all. The condition of persecution remains. They have no freedom of movement. They have no access to fields and to fish for their own livelihood. They are dependent upon two international organisations bringing in food, which the Myanmar authorities turn on and off like a tap. Their kids have no education. They can't get healthcare. They are basically surrounded in urban ghettos like Ong Mingala in Sitwe, which are comparable to the ghettos in which Jews in Europe lived during the Nazi occupation. Or else they are in surrounded villages, unable to leave without written approvals from non-Rohingya Myanmar authorities, even to go to a hospital for healthcare. There is not the mass burnings, shootings that we have seen and the forcible expulsions. That from the period of August to December 2017 is not happening. But everything else is. There will be and there cannot be any return of people from Bangladesh until the situation of the Rohingya who are left is fixed, until the restrictions are lifted. There is no conception by which we can imagine safe, dignified return being possible if they have to return to these conditions. We don't know how many people are there. Probably the best guess is 400,000 to 500,000. Around 120,000 of those are in actual concentration camps. Let's call it for what it is. There are probably 10 or 20,000 in these urban ghettos, and the rest are living in surrounded villages from which they are unable to move without approval. Let's focus our first priority on fixing the situation of the Rohingya who are left. Until that happens, there's going to be no prospect of return, no prospect of resolution. The crisis that we're discussing for these 2 days is not over. The mass expulsions may have stopped, and that's because the Tatmadaw has achieved its purpose. There's no need to get rid of the rest when they are subjected to such enormous restrictions. The demographic makeup of Northern Rakhine State has been changed fundamentally. They've achieved their purpose, but the crisis is not over. We need to look not just at how we deal with the crisis in terms of the past, accountability for crime, but how we deal with it in terms of the future, protecting people, restoring their rights, enabling them to live in dignity in Rakhine State. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to invite Her Excellency Saida, who as the Chief Guest and Keynote Speaker, Bangladesh High Commissioner to the UK, Ireland and Liberia, who's going to speak to us on gender-based violence and justice for forcibly displaced Rohingya.
ল্যাপটপ কানেক্ট করবেন নাকি এটা আপনার আগেরটা সেট করুন
Thank you so much for coming to the High Commission. Thank you.
এটা কি আপনার এটা
Good morning, everyone. Let me start by apologizing for being late. But I really regret not listening to the first part of Mr. Sidoti's presentation, but I think I've listened to a major part of it. And I know that, for this, I was not supposed to be the chief guest. Our Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shahidul Haq, who's an expert on the matter, was supposed to come to present the keynote paper for this conference. And he's currently in China with our Honorable Prime Minister on an official visit, and he had to regret at the last moment. And I was sent to fill in for about, originally I was supposed to speak on the gender-based violence, but I would just speak in general, picking up the pieces from where Mr. Sidoti had left. And hence, I'll just speak on the overall position of Bangladesh, so exactly how we feel and where we are about the Rohingya crisis. So instead of going into that presentation, I just have a few questions to ask to this body of students, academicians, perhaps human rights organizations, as to Bangladesh's position. Number one is, as the name of my presentation suggests, are the Rohingyas still remembered? And by who? Apart from Mr. Sidoti. Why is the undue burden on Bangladesh? And how long will Bangladesh continue to carry this undue burden all by itself? That is my question. I would invite further questions afterwards if anyone has answers to these questions. Why is it that there is no accountability? Why is it that Rohingyas don't have the rights to live in dignity in their homeland, which is Myanmar? And no, they're not Bengalis. So going back to the history of Bangladesh and Rohingyas, when we became independent in 1971, and much, much before that, for the past 1,000 years, Rohingyas, or the Rohan people, have been part and parcel of Myanmar. At that time, it was Burma, and the name of the place where they had settled, they may, back about 500, even 500 years back, people were coming to the Indian subcontinent and to that region by boats, and Arakan was a seaport and an independent sultanate. And Rohingyas have been living there. And this is true that part of Bangladesh at that time, Greater Chittagong, was part of the Arakan state. And we have Rohingyas in Bangladesh, just like we have Rakhines in Bangladesh. It was all part of a big conglomerate. All kinds of borders and boundaries. They were not like the way they are today. After we've been colonized many times and the new boundaries were settled, and finally after the birth of the United Nations, nation states were created, decolonization took place, and every state got their boundaries. When every state got their boundaries, when people who were domiciled on their territory after the boundaries were created have a right, it's called the ipso facto right to citizenship. Therefore, when Bangladesh was created in 1971, the people who lived in Bangladesh's territory, which we had inherited in 1947 as East Pakistan, all the people that were domiciled on our land got Bangladesh citizenship, except for a small faction who had opted to go back to Pakistan. We call them stranded Pakistanis. They remained in the Geneva camps. So their legal identity was well defined. The question is, when the Rohingyas have been part and parcel of Arakan and later on Burma, even before the British annexation of 1824, up to the 1948, when Burma became independent as Union of Burma, Rohingyas continued to be a recognized ethnicity in Myanmar in its first constitution, which was drafted by Aung San Suu Kyi's father. And when he went to Delhi to negotiate, a Rohingya representative accompanied him. It was only until 82 and after that, through the Citizenship Act, that their ethnicity was officially deleted from Myanmar's list of ethnicities. Many a times, I've been to Rakhine State twice, once with my foreign secretary on a bilateral visit, and the other time with the OIC delegation, the first one that went to visit the Rohingya camps in the northern Rakhine State. And on both occasions, the Rohingyas knew that we were coming. And they kept on giving one slogan again and again and again. They kept on saying, Rohingyas, Rohingyas, Rohingyas. It's the only thing they kept on saying, Rohingyas. They were asserting their ethnic identity. They wanted the whole world to know they're not Bengalis, they're Rohingyas. They have a name, they have a language. Why is that being denied? That is a question that international community needs to ask. Today we've heard Mr. Christopher Sidotti's presentation, who's member of the Independent Commission of the UN, and he has raised many pertinent questions. Few of them is that accountability and future accountability. Coming back to Bangladesh, after we were born in 71, in 1978, the first, of course, from between the period of 48 until 71, we were East Pakistan. And problems were there. Actually, problems started during that period in Rakhine State. After the independence, when Aung San Suu Kyi's father was assassinated, after that, the state started renegotiating as to which are the ethnicities they want to keep and integrate with the Burman people, and which are the ethnicities they cannot tolerate. So I'm not going to go into that, the other states. I'm just going to focus on the Rohingya people. So Rohingyas there were Rohingya MPs and ministers in the governments, and even in the 60s, there was a Rohingya radio. There were Rohingyas who went into delegations to United Nations, and there are historical proof to it. However, as the state authorities kept on changing, with time, the positions hardened with gradual extremist militarization. And we saw that there were not systematic push and violations during the period of 48 until 71. But as soon as Bangladesh was created, and obviously we were created through a very tortuous war. It was the war of liberation. We were destroyed and damaged. Our economy was destroyed. And after that, we had to start at a very low economic situation. It was a war-ravaged country, and our father of the nation was assassinated in 1975 at the height of the Cold War. And our country itself was taken over by military dictators for 15 years. And during the first 5 years of that military dictatorship, first 3 years, in 78, for the first time, 200,000 Rohingyas were, just like they fled to Bangladesh in August 2017, they fled to Bangladesh. Because again, houses were burned, they were persecuted, they were killed, women were raped. Similar kinds of crimes were committed on them. And they all, en masse, fled into Bangladesh. In 78, our military leader at that time negotiated very toughly with them and said that you have to take them back. And at that time, an agreement was signed between the two foreign ministries in which the Rohingyas were recognized as Myanmar citizens. We have that document. It's a historic document, an agreement that was signed, and they took them back, all 200,000. Then for 15 years, we were sort of a military autocratic rule. And then in 91, again, democratic elections were held in Bangladesh. And immediately in 92, again, a situation was created, just like Christopher has mentioned, very well designed, very well thought out. This is a good time to push more Rohingyas to Bangladesh. And hence, again, a wave of persecution started, and Rohingyas en masse, 250,000 of them, again fled to Bangladesh. This time, we sat down with them and negotiated the second agreement. The second agreement, they recognized the Rohingyas, so they had watered down the legal definition of Rohingyas, and this time they mentioned the Rohingyas were residents of Myanmar. And this is how the agreement was signed. In the first case, it was totally bilateral. In the second case, we engaged the UNHCR through mutual agreement. And repatriation started from about 1995. And within 10 years, 220,000 Rohingyas were repatriated through a mutual verification process. 20,000 of them stayed back in the camps, which we call the Rohingya refugee camps. However, between the period of 2005, there were change of government, change of administration in both countries. Some things didn't work out, and the repatriation of the balance 20,000 didn't take place. Repatriation stopped for 4 years between 2005 until 2009. And when Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina came to office in 2009, her government immediately went. She sent a foreign minister to Myanmar. Her top priority was that to settle all the unresolved issues with our immediate two neighbors. We share 4,500 kilometers of land boundary with India, and we share 271 with Myanmar. Over the past 10 years, from 2009 to 2014, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina took the initiative to settle our maritime boundary, our land boundary, which hasn't been settled since 1948, since post-independence until 2014, with India. When Prime Minister Modi was elected, during that tenure, all the land boundary issues between Bangladesh and India was resolved. The maritime boundary issue with India, maritime boundary was resolved in 2014. However, this particular issue with Myanmar was never resolved. And we share 4,500 kilometers of land boundary with India. This is the indication that there was no political will on part of Myanmar government to actually resolve these issues. So we did resolve our maritime boundary with Myanmar. We agreed to file our claims to the ITLOS, and the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea settled our maritime boundary in a wonderful manner, and both countries were happy. However, while we have 50 different levels of 50 different institutional mechanisms of engagement with India, we only have one with Myanmar, which is the Foreign Office consultations. We still couldn't succeed in having any border guards talks. We couldn't succeed in having perhaps one until very recently, the first Home Minister's visit. And still, yet, we don't have actually any forum like the Home Ministers. With India, we have the Joint Boundary Working Group. We have, Home Ministers Forum, Home Secretaries Forum, Border Guards Forum, District Commissioners Forum. Every level there's a forum where they meet every 3 to 4 months. With them, we have only one with Myanmar, which is Foreign Office consultations, which is led by the Foreign Secretary from our side, Mr. Shahidul Haq, and from their side, their Permanent Undersecretary. And hence, in 2009, when Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina sent a foreign minister to discuss that we need to really have excellent relations and focus on bilateral trade, connectivity, energy cooperation, we've been asking Myanmar to share their gas with us. So, all these kinds of economic prosperity issues for regional security, regional prosperity, counterterrorism, transnational crimes, which is rampant between Bangladesh and Myanmar border. However, during that time, between 2009 and 2011, the relationship started building. And Christopher has mentioned about June 2012. Just before June 2012, in 2011, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina visited Myanmar. And it was agreed that the Myanmar president would visit Bangladesh in June 2012. We prepared, and one of the key focus of the visit was that while the Myanmar president will be visiting, we would be preparing a delegation, the repatriation process will resume, and we will send back the first batch of a token batch of Rohingya refugees from the camp during the president's visit. The moment that message, the president's visit was supposed to be June 15, and this happened on June 12. They created very well-designed, well-orchestrated incident, and these are all alleged, so I'm not claiming this is all true, but this is alleged. And due to that, the visit was postponed, and Myanmar president never came to Bangladesh ever again. In fact, no Myanmar president came. And that was the beginning of making sure that no Rohingya who has crossed the border into Bangladesh ever goes back. And then started the campaign as to send more Rohingyas to Bangladesh through persecution, I don't want to mention those. I mean, Christopher has already mentioned that. Now our question is, Bangladesh, which is already given its sovereign space, more than 6,000 acres in Cox's Bazar, has been totally felled. There are no trees there. We are now readying a large island, it's called Bhashanchar, that's going to relegate 100,000 because the camps, the population density in the camp is unbearable. Mr. Sidhi just mentioned that, the situation in the camps is deplorable, but the situation on the other side is unbearable. And if anyone has to really give relief, this work should start in Myanmar's Rakhine state. We have huge burden on our economy. In fact, there are other problems of sovereignty where we have large presence of international community in Cox's Bazar, and frankly, nothing is in our hands. It's all decided by the entire coalition of international development partners as to how things will be done. We do have a national committee, but little is in our hands. If you ask me, that's my opinion. The UN Security Council, United Kingdom took the initiative for a resolution. But before that, there's a history of resolution since this incident happened. So after August 2017, there's the UN General Assembly Third Committee that deals with human rights in the General Assembly. There was a voting on the situation. Well, by the way, before that, until 2011, since there was talk about elections in Myanmar and the return of democracy, and the state councillor was elected, from just before that year, the EU, which had traditionally brought a resolution on this issue for the past 20 years, before 2013, decided to withdraw that resolution. And then there was some pressure for some countries. Again, the resolution was tabled, but it was a very watered down resolution. It was adopted by consensus. Before that, voting used to take place on that resolution. So there was no resolution. There was a resolution by consensus, which was a toned down resolution, until 2017. This happened. Again in 2017, there was a resolution on human rights situation in Myanmar, and in the voting, it was the EU, the OIC. In the first resolution was tabled by OIC. The EU had abstained at that time, and few countries, about 10 countries, voted against, which was, of course, the Buddhist ASEAN, Russia, China. And among those who abstained, our neighbor India was also there, and a few other countries. And then in March 2018, there's a resolution of the Human Rights Council. And again, we've noted, I'm just briefing you on the voting patterns. It tells you about geopolitics on this issue. And in Geneva, at the Human Rights Council, as you know, Human Rights Council has 47 members and elected members, and only they can vote. So there are 3 countries who voted against, which was, again, Russia, China, and perhaps, Philippines? Philippines. They have their geopolitical reasons or their national reasons why they're voting against. As you know, Philippines itself has moral Muslim problems, and it's a position of stance that they have taken consistently. And of course, Russia, China being Security Council members, they have been opposing this resolution even in the Security Council. And actually, they have thwarted down an attempt by the United Kingdom to draft a resolution on the Rohingya situation. In fact, that could have taken care of the accountability issue. There was a prospect of that. So that was shot down towards the end of 2018. Actually, the UN fact-finding mission led by UK PR Ambassador Karen Pierce, when she went back after the fact-finding mission, that's the time when they decided that we need to draft a resolution or discuss one on the situation in Myanmar and the accountability factor. But like I said, it had died down before it saw the light of the day because of opposition from certain members of the Security Council. So this has been the voting pattern in the UN and the security, in Geneva. And after that, Bangladesh in 2018 took over the chairmanship of the International Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers, which is the Foreign Ministers Forum for OIC. And as the chair, when we hosted the ICFM in Dhaka in 2018, Gambia the Gambia, had demanded that there should be a separate statement on the accountability factor, on the accountability question of human rights and accountability question on the Rohingya issue. And that a declaration was adopted. Subsequently, the Gambia has informed the OIC members that they are willing to submit some communication to the International Court of Justice. On the other hand, I don't know if Chris has mentioned, but the International Criminal Court, the chief prosecutor found grounds, at least he or she expressed her intention that, there are grounds and evidences to create a case where they felt that some crimes against humanity or atrocity crimes were committed, and there were grounds and evidences to initiate such an action. This is where things stand right now, as far as Bangladesh witnesses the accountability factor. At this point, there's even suggestion, some random senator from the United States, that why don't you give the Rakhine state to Bangladesh along with the Rohingyas? Suggesting that, well, this is just a perception, and this is a suggestion from many, Rohingyas are Muslim. Why don't you just send them from Buddhist Myanmar and send them to Muslim Bangladesh? And just lump them up. This is the status of and state of international law. When we have resolutions, we have institutions such as the Human Rights Council, General Assembly, International Criminal Court, ICJ, independent tribunals, but this is the state of affairs when it comes to Rohingyas. I hope you know that. It's kind of banana republic, but we are accepting it. My question is, why is Bangladesh being victimized? Injustice is being done to the Rohingyas, but injustice has been done to Bangladesh as well. A great injustice is being done to Bangladesh. Our Prime Minister, in 2017, August, when they first flooded into Bangladesh, went to visit them. And she said, in 1971, when we had state-sponsored killings and genocide and crimes against humanity committed on the soil of Bangladesh, 10 million refugees went, 10 million people fled to neighboring India. And we know exactly how the Rohingyas felt, because they were persecuted. They ran in the fear of life. They were raped, they were enslaved, they were tortured, they were killed, the babies were killed. And this is not me saying, this is Rohingyas who've come to Bangladesh. This is their first-hand accounts that they have given to people of what happened to them. And from that perspective, it was only normal that Bangladesh would give refuge. But we knew that there's a war and we had a home to come back to. The difference here is that Rohingyas have a home, but they don't know if they can go back there. So we thought, last 2 times they came, we negotiated, they'll go back. But the last 2 times, there was no geopolitics involved in it. This time, because geopolitics is involved, there's no solution to the problem. How can you pardon that? So if you look at the voting patterns in the General Assembly and in the Human Rights Council, it'll give you a clear picture as to where everybody's standing on this issue. So there's China, Russia, Japan, who are voting against it. Could be economic interest, could be many interests, could be geopolitical interest, could be nationally principled position that they maintain about insurgency, minorities. I'm not sure, and I don't want to comment. I'm not competent to comment on that. But the question is, what is the vast majority of human rights community doing about it? Why is it that the Rohingya people are almost forgotten? Day before yesterday, there was a debate at the UK Parliament. There is an all-party parliamentary group on Rohingyas, which is chaired by Anne Main MP on the all-party. She's also the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Bangladesh, and co-chaired by Rushna Ali, who's a Bangladeshi British origin MP. They put forward a great debate, but Bangladesh wasn't even invited there. This is the problem. The greatest sufferer of this problem after the Rohingyas is Bangladesh. And yet we are never called in to say what we want to say. So this is our story. we feel that a great injustice is being done to Bangladesh too, by not taking any accountability of the crimes that have been committed. Now, there can be two interpretations, and I'm going to end here with that. My question is, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said in 2017 in an Al Jazeera interview that, well, that very morning, she attended the UN Secretary General's reception for all heads of state and government. And President Trump had a bit of conversation with her. And, Al Jazeera interviewed her and asked her that this morning when you spoke with President Trump, didn't you ask him to support you and provide you humanitarian assistance or take some of the Rohingyas as a third country rehabilitation? And that happens all the time. She said that, how can I ask US President to do so? I know that his country has positions on taking in Mexican or Syrian refugees or migrants. So obviously I didn't say that. But I just want to make it very clear that we faced the same situation in 1971. We understand their pain. If we can, we are a poor country. We're not a rich country, but we're ready to share our meals with the Rohingyas. We're ready to share our space with the Rohingyas temporarily until they can go back safely and return with dignity to their homes. This was her answer. My question is, the international community should not take advantage of our generosity. We clearly feel that we've been taken advantage of and we've been taken for a ride. I think if we just leave, if somebody suggests that Rohingyas are fine in Bangladesh, they should be left there, then what message are we giving? We are saying it's absolutely fine for a state to persecute their minorities. It's absolutely fine to create monodimensional societies. It's absolutely fine to rape women, make them pregnant, enslave them, and throw them to another country. But it's not fine. And you have to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Great pleasure to have you here speaking to us today at UCL. We're very appreciative of that. I should just say that there will now be a tea break, but we also want to have a group photograph, and this is going to be downstairs on the ground floor of this building in G11, and you'll be direct from there. We will start the next session 10 minutes later at 11:10. So thank you very much indeed for both of our speakers in this session. Thank you very much.